Hey everyone, welcome back to Crime and Wine. I've been MIA the past few weeks, and that's just because I got super sick and then a close family member of mine was hospitalized. But it's just been so crazy, but I've missed you all and I'm so excited to be back, and I've already got some really interesting cases lined up. Also, quickly, I want to say thank you to all my new subscribers and to my YouTube fam. We are now a little bit over 200 subs, slowly making the progress, but I am so thankful for each and every one of you guys. So again, thank you guys for supporting this channel. And if you enjoy today's content and have not yet subscribed, it would mean the world to me if you did subscribe and like this video and leave a comment with your thoughts about today's case. All right, with that being said, grab your wine and let's get into today's case. Honestly, guys, I don't even know where to begin with this case, but I guess I'll start with a forewarning that this is going to be very disturbing and upsetting, so stick around for as long as you can handle. We're looking at the case of Richard Huckle, and I'm really surprised that I personally have never heard of this man in spite of the hundred of true crime documentaries, podcasts, and YouTube videos I've watched. But this man's, his crimes are just horrendous. Once again, this is a very horrendous and insidious case which involves severe child sexual abuse, so if you cannot handle this topic, then please head to one of my other videos to take a look at instead. Richard Huckle was born on May 14, 1986 in Ashford, Kent, located in England. He grew up in a middle-class family where nothing was ever out of the ordinary for him. At the age of 16, he went on a month-long expedition to visit a school in Namibia, South Africa, where he would begin to study at the nearby South Kent College. He would return home, and he was known to be a regular attendee of the Ashford Baptist Church. So this is what we can call the notorious gap year, because from 2005 to 2006, Richard spent a gap year in Malaysia when he was just 19, but he would regularly return to the country under the titles of a freelance photographer and later as a Christian teacher and philanthropist, specifically with poor Christian communities in the countries of Malaysia and Cambodia. So let's fast forward to December 19th of 2014 when Richard was arrested by officers from Britain's National Crime Agency at London's Gatwick Airport. But how this arrest came about is just beyond interesting, so bear with me and try to follow along because it's pretty cool how the Special Force task came to this arrest. It started in the year 2000 when a man named Brian Y. was arrested. Brian was 42 years old and he had built a child abuse film company that would be worth $4 million, which is still to this day among the largest ever to be discovered. So disgusting. But anyways, when they went to arrest Brian and searched his home, they found tons of useful evidence. Brian actually kept records of his customers and their details, which was interesting because it was said that about a tenth of his 370 customers were based in Queensland. So all of those records and information was passed to John Roos, who was the head of Task Force Argos, which was a Queensland police unit that specialized in disrupting child sex abuse networks online. So after Brian was arrested and all his records was passed to John Roos, John was able to arrest dozens of these customers, which included one specific man who subscribed to some other sites, which was a highly organized forum. The name of that site or forum was never released as well. So after this man was arrested, they had access and took over this man's account, and the task force was just, basically at this point, they were just an undercover member. And this is where things get very interesting, because this is where they realized that this very popular site / forum was very intricate, so intricate that it was running like a company or business with intricate hierarchies. So one of the main rules for this forum was that users had to upload material at least every 30 days or they would get kicked out of the forum. And keep in mind, in this case, I didn't mention this, but this of course is all happening via the dark web. And I'm just appalled to hear that this forum had 45 45,000 accounts that were following exactly that rule of uploading content at least every month, if not more. Imagine that, or rather, I'm sure you don't want to, but that's at least 45,000 pieces of child abuse content a month. So far, we got the main man that racked in millions for the dark website, who was Brian Ways. He was arrested. Police took his detailed records after a search warrant, and they obtained lots of evidence that was passed to Special Task Force John Roos. He then arrested one specific man who they would later join in on the website undercover, of course, using this man's account. From here, they learned how the site was ran, and the police were able to comb through members, and they even ranked each of its 45,000 accounts according to the quality of their output, with a producer's area walled off to all but the most vetted. At the top was the man, effectively the CEO. He regularly started his messages with the cheery greeting, "Hi Yaz." This was a very unusual phrase I don't think many of us would have ever heard, let alone used, but they wanted to know who this horrendous man was. Remember, to at least stay in the forum as an active member and have access to everyone else's content, you would have had to post it monthly. And this man, well, he was at the top of the list, so that says a lot. So, long story about this man, but they combed through everything and anything on this forum, outside the dark web through Google, for anything that they could identify who this man was, who used that specific greeting term, "Hi Yaz." They knew this man was somewhere in Australia, and they also knew that some of the children in the work he produced were clearly indigenous. They would identify and catch the man behind who used that greeting catchphrase and was like the king out of the 45,000 members on this site. He ended up being 32-year-old Shannon McCool, and terrifyingly, he worked in childcare, and a lot of his past started to resurface when he was arrested in June of 2014. And now, with this man's arrest, officers had immediately took control of his account now. Now, one of the world's largest online pedophile networks was suddenly being run from the Brisbane headquarters of the Queensland Police. For 6 months in 2014, Task Force's Argos was all seeing to, with access as McCool to the forum's every crevice and the private messages of all 45,000 users, including Richard Huckles. And yeah, Richard was among the 24 of the forum's most wanted people. That's 24 out of 45,000 people, and he was on that list. Richard was a producer who uploaded exclusively fresh material. He was really careful and would usually blur the faces and backgrounds and erase any telltale metadata from his work. And he also released advice, including on how to evade police detection, as well as a 180-page manual titled "The Exclusive Step-by-Step Guide for Practicing Safe and Fun Sex with Children." Huckle had authored his own 60-page tome titled "Pedophiles and Poverty: Child Lover Guide." Access to the full site of Huckle's material provided the breakthrough. It was not what he photographed, but what he photographed with. Embedded in some of his images, overlooked when he swept the files and metadata, was the brand and model of his Olympus camera. A tiny clue, but it was enough. Officers exhaustively swept photography sites such as Flickr and Trek Earth for photos taken in Southeast Asia using the make and model. And sure enough, they found some pretty legal images from Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and they were all taken with the same make and model of that camera. The photographer also had a penchant for shooting children, sometimes naked, but, quote, nothing illegal in them. Police traced the legitimate photographs to an email address, which in turn illuminated his accounts on other websites. In an echo of McCool's case, one of these accounts was registered under a similar name to that of the pedophile on the dark web. And the police say, quote, realistically, by that stage, it was no chance it would be anyone else. The digital trail also led to a studio named Huckle Photography Productions. It was based in Malaysia and linked to Huckle's public Facebook profile. There, he had been more brazen than police could have imagined. Police say, quote, on his photos on Facebook, there were photos of similar children and the same children that appeared in the abuse material that he published online. So at this point, the police and everyone, basically from Australia to Britain, knew they finally had enough evidence and proof to capture and arrest Richard, but it would take more than 4 months before an arrest would actually happen, because he was currently in Malaysia at this time, and supposedly it was because they didn't feel like they had enough evidence to arrest him in Malaysia. So the authorities in Britain had to wait for Richard to make a wrong move, and that's exactly what Richard did. Richard had actually posted a Facebook post that said, quote, "Great news, I've just booked a flight home for Christmas," and he even hashtagged the airline. So Richard was arrested at Gatwick Airport on December 19th of 2014. Computers and hard drives in his possession contained more than 20,000 indecent images of children, around 1,000 depicting children he had himself abused. And to this day, he has refused to give up the keys to the encrypted files located on his laptop, which is believed to contain additional victims and thousands more images and videos. Upon Richard's arrest, he was first bailed under the condition that he stay at his parents' house. But I guess one day, Richard got drunk and admitted everything, and this made his parents extremely upset, rightfully so, and they immediately kicked him out of the house, and the father alerted the police, asking them, practically begging them, to go and get him that instance. After this arrest, he was charged with 91 counts in 2016, and he was convicted of 71 offenses against 23 children, making him one of, if not the most, of Britain's worst pedophiles. During the trial, tons of information about his atrocities were exposed. So we're gonna get a little bit into the details, so this next part, just forewarning, disclaimer. As if being a pedophile in itself isn't bad, he had also kept a diary of the grotesque acts that he committed against these children, including those he had molested in Malaysia. And this is so sickening, but his youngest victim was just 6 months old and the oldest was 12. Richard had masqueraded himself as a devoted Christian and English teacher, which helped him gain access to children through churches, schools, and orphanages. He would give these children alcohol and drugs and abuse them while recording and uploading all of that content onto the dark web. And as I stated a bit earlier, Richard had also went as far as writing a manual to instruct and teach other pedophiles on how to abuse children and get away with it. He would even say on the dark web and in this manual that he deliberately targeted the cities with the poorest and most vulnerable communities because he was able to exploit his status as a white man to gain their trust, groom, and then abuse their children. And he would boast about this, saying how easy it was. And guys, I can't even stomach to say this, but just so you guys know just how evil people can be, he had made a comment on the dark web forum saying, quote, "Hit the jackpot, a 3-year-old girl as loyal to me as my dog, and nobody seemed to care." And he continued by saying, quote, "Impoverished kids are definitely much easier to seduce than middle-class kids." In one instance, 5 of the children were living in a children's home, and on one occasion, he took a little girl out to celebrate her 5th birthday and molested her at his house in Kuala Lumpur. Following Richard's conviction in 2016, Malaysian journalist Mahi interviewed one of his victims who had been repeatedly raped by Richard from the age of 3. Mahi said that the girl had told her family about the abuse, but was instead told to, quote, "just shut up." He also kept an electronic ledger or scorecard on which he used to award himself points according to how far his abuse had gone with a particular victim. In total, prosecutors unveiled 29 victims and over 20,000 photos, with many featuring Richard participating in the abuse, but it was believed that there could be more than hundreds of victims throughout Southeast Asia like Malaysia, Cambodia, where he would visit frequently, and thousands more photos stored on Richard's encrypted laptop. At an initial hearing at the Old Bailey in January of 2016, Richard pleaded not guilty to all 91 charges, which took over an hour to read in court. Prosecutors started to prepare these separate trials as they did not believe a jury should be subjected to all of the graphic evidence that would be presented in a single trial. In April, during a preliminary trial hearing, Richard pleaded guilty to 71 of the 91 charges he was facing after a request to watch all of the evidence against him in court. During the hearings, the full scale of Richard's crimes became apparent for the first time. The prosecution, led by Brian O'Neill, showed evidence of a long history of crimes that started during Richard's gap year in 2006 and continued for 8 to 9 years until he was arrested in 2014. And during the sentencing hearing, Richard's lawyer, Philip Sapsford, read a statement from Richard, which read the following: "I really understand and acknowledge the true scale of damage it caused to the Malaysian community. I had hoped to escape this mundane life of solitude in the UK, yet was overwhelmed by the attention I received in Malaysia. I completely misjudged the affections I received from these children. My low self-esteem and lack of confidence with women was no excuse for me to use these children as an outlet. I am open and eager to rehabilitate from this offending behavior. I don't want to become a martyr to sex tourism in Malaysia. This was all my doing as a consequence of my immaturity, and I'm truly remorseful." Following all of this, it caused an uproar with the Malaysian government and their systems because they were put under fire from Child Protective Services. And I know this case was really hard to hear and stomach, and it's not something we'd ever want to imagine or hear is happening, but the truth is that it happens every day. It's said that about 300,000 children are trafficked every year across the world. And the US accounts for about 5.1% of the children that are trafficked. And I would highly recommend that you self-educate yourself and also make the decision yourself whether you'd like to support the causes that go towards combating child sex trafficking. And there's many sites such as SaveTheChildren.org or Operation Underground Railroad, just to name a couple. And I think it's of utmost importance that we are all aware of the things that are happening in order to spread awareness and be aware for the sake of our own family's safety. Okay guys, last part of this case, and huge disclaimer because this next part is pretty intense and gruesome. In October of 2019, Richard was gruesomely raped and killed by his fellow prison inmate Paul Fitzgerald, who wanted to make Richard, quote, feel what those children felt. This attack against Richard lasted 78 minutes in their cell at HMP Full Sutton, East Yorkshire. So apparently Fitzgerald went into Richard's cell and tied him up. He then raped him and assaulted him with various weapons before strangling him with an electrical cord. An autopsy would later determine that Richard died from being strangled by an electric cable, but he had also been sexually assaulted with a 4-inch long kitchen utensil and had a pen forced up his nose into his brain before he died. According to McDonald, Fitzgerald later told the manager of a mental health team at the prison that he had killed Richard in, quote, cold blood and wanted to cook bits of his body. He said he enjoyed what he was doing to the body of Mr. Huckle and that he would have gone on to kill 2 or 3 other men that day. And he went on to say that the reason that he did not kill more was that he was having too much fun with Mr. Huckle. Fitzgerald was given a life sentence and was sentenced to serve at least 34 years in jail for this crime. Well guys, I know that was an extremely upsetting and gruesome and hard to stomach case, but I do think once again that it's very important that we self-educate ourselves on the dangers of the world. If you're into true crime, like I assume you are if you're watching this video, then we know the dangers that lurk outside every single day, and it's great to self-educate in order to protect yourselves and your families. So please do that. And aside from that, thank you guys so much for joining me back here for another episode of Crime and Wine. If you have not yet subscribed, please consider subscribing. It would mean so much to me. And if you are subscribed, make sure to like this video and leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's case or any other case that you find intriguing that I should look into. So with that being said, I'll see you guys back here next week for another episode of Crime and Wine.